You spit on my baby in a grocery store line, and now you're pretending it's not a big deal? Darla Weymouth didn't even blink. She adjusted the laminated badge around her neck, the one that read Redfern Glade HOA Board, Vice President, and muttered, "You should have covered her. That carrier's in violation of Section 12D, exposed fabrics in shared commercial zones." Micah's arms tightened around Dallas. Our daughter was still strapped into the blue sling on his chest, blinking, confused. She didn't cry. Not yet. She just stared, wet cotton clinging to her chest, at the woman who leaned in and spit without hesitation. And Darla? She turned her back like she'd just given a lecture on garden fertilizer. Like she hadn't just crossed the line from HOA busybody to criminal. I stepped out from behind the end cap display and said clearly, "You just committed battery against a child, in a public venue, with 3 cameras and a registered HOA database pinging back to a county-monitored server." Darla turned, finally seeing me, and for the first time in the 6 years I've lived here, she blinked like something cracked, like something she didn't understand just shifted beneath her feet. And she should have. Because I'm not just some quiet husband with a baby in aisle 4. I'm Ronan Bexley, cross-designated officer with Colorado's Public Threat Intervention Task Force. And what Darla didn't know was this: the server she's using for her neighborhood watch cameras. I helped design the firmware 6 years ago, back when they asked for volunteer tech help. Subscribe now if you want to see what happens when HOA power games collide with real law. Trust me, you'll want to watch her fall. I still hadn't reached for my badge. I didn't need to. Not yet. Not while she was standing on the HOA-owned property she thought gave her more power than the Constitution. The same property my husband and I pay dues to. The same space where she had just spit on our child. The sling she hit? It wasn't some mass market carrier. It was made by my mother, stitched 1 loop at a time while she was dying of pancreatic cancer. She couldn't hold her future granddaughter, but she could sew. And she did, right up to the last week. That powder blue sling was her goodbye, her blessing, and now it reeked of peppermint gum and power. Micah didn't speak. He hadn't said a word since Darla approached him at checkout. He'd just looked down at Dallas, at the wet mark blooming across her chest. Then he looked at me, not panicked, not angry, just waiting, because he knew the line had been crossed, and he knew I would act. Darla had been circling our family for months. First it was the porch planter being non-compliant. Then it was our Christmas lights interfering with aesthetic harmony. But we kept quiet. We followed the rules. We didn't bite, because we'd already survived worse. We'd fought 2 years in IFIG adoption courts. We'd sat through home inspections that judged the tilt of our dining chairs and the labels on our cleaning supplies. Dallas wasn't just our daughter. She was our battle one. And now Darla thought she could reduce all of that to a citation. The worst part? This grocery plaza, the Commons, is technically HOA-regulated land, bought up by the board years ago during a zoning loophole. That gave Darla just enough leash to weaponize policy in public, enforceable through obscure civil clauses. But what she didn't count on, my clearance, my training, my authorization to act when a child is endangered in a health-coded jurisdiction, even off-duty. The cashier had stopped scanning. 2 customers behind us backed away. I watched Darla's eyes dart toward the automatic doors, toward retreat. But she wasn't getting out of this with a smug remark. She committed assault. On camera, with an HOA badge and frame. And I was about to make sure the entire board watched what happened next. They posted the citation to our front door before sunrise. Micah found it taped between the deadbolt and the peephole, sealed in a plastic sleeve stamped with the Redfern Glade HOA logo. The language was surgical. Formal notice of sanitation protocol breach, Article 7, subsection C, Clause 3.3.3. Resident identified, Micah Bexley. Nature of violation, contamination risk, Category 2. I read it once, then again. The words didn't change. They were trying to turn spitting on a baby into our fault. According to the citation, we'd transported unapproved textile equipment into a community-shared retail environment without proper shielding, thereby jeopardizing ambient health compliance. They cited the baby's sling. They cited Micah's shirt. They even cited the cart handle, claiming it hadn't been wiped after contact with exposed biological residue. Micah stood barefoot in the entryway, blinking at the letter like it had come from another planet. Dallas slept on his shoulder, her tiny fists curled against his collarbone. She didn't know she'd been turned into a health code. She just snored softly, warm and safe. "This is retaliation," I said, already pulling up the HOA codebook on my phone. "She's building a paper trail so she can justify banning us from the common areas." Micah didn't answer. He just walked Dallas to her bassinet and laid her down like she was made of glass. I could see it in his shoulders, the way he exhaled like something cracked inside. I'd seen this before. Victims made to feel like perpetrators, abusers rewriting the record while the system looked the other way. Darla wasn't just trying to humiliate us, she was trying to erase what really happened. 2 hours later, we received an email from the Redfern board. Effective immediately, our household was suspended from using the community clubhouse, playgrounds, and all HOA-sponsored events, pending resolution of health compliance. Inquiries. It was signed by Darla Weymouth herself, with her usual clipped tone and overuse of passive voice. No mention of the assault, no reference to the store cameras, just a cold, sanitized quarantine notice wrapped in policy jargon. I called the store manager. He said the footage had already been requested by the HOA for internal review. Not law enforcement, not us, just Darla, making sure the narrative stayed hers. By noon, the whispers started. A neighbor across the street, Mandy Cho, didn't wave when she passed. Another jogger slowed, stared at our porch, then sped up again. Micah tried to take Dallas on a walk around the block, but by the time he reached the community lawn, a security patrol rolled up and asked if he'd cleared baby carrier re-entry with the HOA sanitation officer. There is no sanitation officer. They're making it up as they go. But every rule they invent gets recorded, printed, and stamped, like it's always been there. That's how they win. Not with force, with forms. I spent the evening dissecting the citation, cross-referencing every clause against the official Redfern charter. Most of the wording traced back to a blanket policy added last year, emergency health protocol discretion, giving board members the right to enforce real-time hazard decisions during unspecified public health threats. It wasn't voted on. It was slipped in during an administrative meeting with no public notice. One of those quiet amendments that let people like Darla pretend they're protecting the neighborhood while using fear to punish difference. Micah sat beside me on the couch, eyes fixed on the bassinet across the room. "She didn't even hesitate," he said finally. "She looked right at Dallas and did it." I didn't respond. I was still scrolling through archive meeting minutes when I saw a name I hadn't expected. Gilrin Marchant, HOA treasurer, present at the policy vote. Not listed as a sponsor of the amendment, but he'd signed the log. I remembered Gil, soft-spoken, quiet at the annual block meetings, always polite but never opinionated. He'd offered me a drink once at a 4th of July barbecue, then stopped mid-pour when Darla arrived. I remembered that freeze. He knew something, and if he still had a conscience, he might be the only person left on that board who could help us prove this wasn't just a health code issue. It was targeted harassment dressed up as regulation, the kind of thing I've seen buried 100 times before. But this time, it was personal. Gilrin Marchant didn't speak for the first 20 minutes of the HOA meeting. He sat at the far end of the conference table, half hidden behind a stack of printed reports, his pen moving silently across an attendance sheet. He wore the same gray cardigan he always did, sleeves rolled to his forearms, eyes lowered, like he was doing math no one else could follow. The kind of man people forget is even in the room until his signature turns up on a decision that changes everything. I watched from the back row of the room, out of uniform, hoodie zipped to the collar, cap low. Not a resident this time, just an observer. Darla sat front and center, surrounded by the other board members like she was chairing a federal commission. She opened with a long speech about preserving health dignity in shared spaces. Her voice was steady, smug, confident, not a hint of remorse. To her, the grocery store incident wasn't a scandal. It was a righteous act of enforcement. "We've initiated a Category 2 contamination protocol," she said, hands folded like she was praying. "This incident highlights why textile consistency and material transparency are non-negotiable in our guidelines." A few attendees nodded, most just stared. No one interrupted. I glanced at Gil. His pen had stopped. Darla continued. "To that end, the board will consider a temporary bylaw expansion, a new clause allowing the sanitation subcommittee to restrict personal items that present aesthetic or material risks, including unregistered carriers, slings, and wraps. Unregistered. They were about to make it official. If your baby carrier didn't match the HOA palette, or if Darla just didn't like you, it could be banned, and you could be cited, suspended, silenced. Furthermore, she added, I propose this expansion be applied retroactively to all relevant incidents since January of this year. That was the tell. She didn't just want to punish us. She wanted to rewrite the past, on paper, make the spit disappear under forms and footnotes. Gil cleared his throat, barely audible. But Darla stopped mid-sentence. I'm sorry, Treasurer Marchant. Gil adjusted his glasses. I think we need to be cautious about the language. Retroactive enforcement invites legal exposure. Darla smiled, all teeth. The board has discretion. Our charter supports real-time flexibility. Gil didn't argue. He just nodded and went back to his pen. But his hands were shaking. After the meeting, I waited by the side entrance. Gil stepped out with his briefcase tucked under one arm. Cardigan sleeves pushed higher now, like he couldn't breathe in the fabric. He saw me, paused, then walked past like he didn't. Gil, I said quietly, you signed the vote last year, the emergency protocol. He turned halfway. It was supposed to be a placeholder, just language. Darla said it was precautionary. It's being used to target my daughter. His eyes dropped. I know. Then help me stop it. He looked around. No one else was there. Just the buzz of halogen lights above the HOA parking lot and the distant sound of sprinklers clicking on across the lawn. I can't, he said. You don't know what she's like behind closed doors. I don't care, I said. This isn't a debate anymore. This is criminal retaliation under the color of authority. She spat on a child, Gil. She weaponized her title to humiliate my family, then used policy to cover it. He swallowed hard. I didn't know what she was going to do. I didn't think she'd go that far. But now you do. He didn't answer, just nodded once, barely visible, then walked away. But I'd seen what I needed. He knew it was wrong, and he'd already started to break. What he didn't realize yet was that Darla's whole scheme, her retroactive enforcement, her abuse of emergency clauses, her made-up citations, depended on silence, on people like Gil staying afraid. If even one board member pushed back, the entire structure would start to wobble. And Gil Marchant? He wasn't built to hold up rot forever. Micah tried to smile when we reached the park, but it didn't reach his eyes. He held Dallas against his chest in a clean cotton sling. White this time, neutral enough to avoid notice. Or so we thought. We weren't there to make a statement. We just wanted air, sun, maybe 15 minutes of feeling normal. It was the Community Baby Wellness Fair, an annual HOA event with music, picnic mats, and free pediatric screenings. The kind of thing every new parent was encouraged to attend. We didn't even make it to the playground. A red vest with an HOA logo stepped in front of us before we crossed the sidewalk. The woman was maybe mid-50s, hair tied into a tight bun, clipboard clutched like a badge. I'm going to need to see clearance documentation, she said, without even looking at Micah, just at the sling. He blinked. Clearance for what? For re-entry with an infant previously involved in a contamination notice. I stepped forward, voice level. There is no re-entry policy. This isn't a secure facility. It's an open park. She turned slightly toward me, chin lifted like she was used to people backing down. All event areas today are under temporary sanitation oversight, per Emergency Clause 12D, activated by the board. I looked past her. Darla was standing at the central pavilion, drink in hand, flanked by two other board members. She saw us, smiled, tipped her cup in a silent mock toast. I could feel Micah stiffen beside me. Please step off the event lawn, the woman said, already checking a laminated sheet. Your names are flagged. I'm not authorized to let you pass. You're just following orders? I asked. She paused. I'm just keeping babies safe. From what? A clean wrap and a silent walk? We turned back without a word. There was no point pushing, not yet. On the way out, I noticed two young moms sitting near the sidewalk with their strollers. They'd been watching, whispering. I caught part of it as we passed. Thought he was arrested after that grocery scene. No, she said it was staged. Micah didn't look at them. He kept his eyes forward, one hand covering the back of Dallas's head like she needed, shielding from more than sunlight. Later that evening, I called the county clerk's office, asked if they had any record of Redfern Glade registering new public health protocols for event enforcement. The man on the other end typed for a while, then said, "Nothing on file under that HOA. If they're restricting access to public community space, they need municipal health officer sign-off." That confirmed it. They were fabricating authority now, layering invisible fences over public space, hoping the language sounded real enough to scare people into compliance. It wasn't just about us anymore. This was a blueprint, and she was testing it in daylight. I opened the HOA website and checked the event announcement again. At the bottom, in fine print, a new clause had been added. Participants must comply with temporary sanitation enforcement policies as determined by the board and its event representatives. Micah leaned over my shoulder. That wasn't there before. No, but now it is, and that's all she needs. They were moving fast, adjusting the story, reshaping the rules in real time, and if I didn't stop it, she'd bury the truth under 3 layers of official-looking paperwork. "She wants you to snap," Micah said quietly. "She wants you to show up in uniform, to make it look like intimidation. She's not going to get that. What will she get?" "The one thing she's afraid of," I said. "Accountability." We sat in silence, Dallas between us, her fingers wrapped around one of Micah's shirt buttons, like it was the only thing that tethered her to peace. My phone buzzed. An email. Subject line, regarding policy amendment records. It was from Gil, no message. Just a scanned attachment of board meeting minutes, dated the day after the grocery store incident. Highlighted in yellow was a new clause. Any infant involved in a sanitation conflict may be suspended from community events until full decontamination review is completed. Retroactive enforcement tied to a fabricated policy, designed within 24 hours of Darla's assault. Gil hadn't said a word, but now he was speaking. The county health office confirmed what I already suspected. No one from Redfern Glade had submitted any sanitation policies for review, temporary or otherwise. The moment I gave them the HOA's name and the fabricated infant decontamination clause, the man on the phone paused and asked me to repeat it. Then he sighed and said, "We'll escalate. That kind of language is not just bad policy, it's dangerous." But it wasn't until I walked back into my old office that I knew the exact leverage I had. I hadn't been inside the regional task force building since I stepped away 6 months ago, but the reception staff still recognized me. I signed the visitor log, flashed my inactive badge, and asked for a sit-down with my former field supervisor, Detective Lorna Hayes. She didn't ask questions, just told me to come in and close the door. She glanced over the file I brought, printed citations, Darla's email, the grocery plaza's surveillance timestamps. "She really spit on your daughter?" Lorna asked quietly. I nodded once, and then rewrote the HOA code to make it look like it was a justified response to textile contamination. Lorna leaned back. "That's not policy abuse. That's public endangerment under color of authority." "Exactly." She tapped her fingers against the desk. "You said this happened on HOA-owned commercial property?" "Technically, yes. The grocery plaza is deeded to Redfern Glades Board under their Commons Holdings LLC. It gives Darla jurisdiction to enforce policy on that land, unless she crosses into criminal territory." Lorna arched a brow. "Which she did the second she used that jurisdiction to spit on a minor and then fabricate a health policy to justify it. She also denied us access to a wellness event using a clause created 24 hours after the incident." Lorna reached for a form. "If we can confirm her abuse of authority and you've got first-hand witness documentation, I'll sign the referral. She's not a cop. She doesn't get to create an arrest-style suspension process for babies." We went over everything. The citation language, the digital trail, the HOA's history of targeting non-compliant residents under vague sanitation rules. Lorna confirmed what I needed. The moment Darla posted a health restriction in a publicly zoned area without municipal approval, she broke county code. "She has no legal shield," Lorna said. "You're clear to report it as a civil abuse case with criminal exposure. Want me to tag the county attorney?" "No," I said. "Not yet. I want the health board to hit her first, quietly. Let her scramble before she knows who's really coming." Lorna gave a tight smile. You always did prefer the long game. When I left the office, I didn't feel relief, not yet. But I felt a shift. I sent an encrypted file to the County Health Oversight Division, a compiled folder of timestamps, emails, Gill's attached minutes, and a statement of facts written in clear, dry language. I flagged it as a targeted policy misuse report under Community Health Regulation falsification. Then I called the HOA's sanitation hotline. It rang once. Then Darla answered. "Redfern Glade Health Compliance," she said, chipper as ever. "This is Ronan Bexley. You're being reviewed by the County Health Board. You'll receive a formal inquiry by the end of the week." Silence. I could hear her swallow. "You can't just... You altered bylaws to create health restrictions on infants. You enforced them on unapproved property. You fabricated risk to justify an assault. I don't have to just do anything. The statutes are doing the work for me." She tried to laugh, but it cracked halfway through. "Do you really think anyone's going to side with you after the way you... I don't need sides, Darla. I have jurisdiction. And the county has no patience for HOA games that put children at risk." I ended the call. When I got home, Micah was in the nursery. Dallas lay on her back, cooing softly at the mobile above her. The sling hung beside the crib, freshly washed, the stitching still strong. The one my mother made, the one Darla tried to erase. I kissed Dallas on the forehead and sat beside Micah. "It's starting," I said. The real part. He didn't ask what I meant. He just said, "Good." The notice arrived in Darla's inbox 48 hours later. A formal notification from the County Health Oversight Division, citing her for potential unauthorized enforcement of public health policy. The language was sharp and clinical, the kind that makes HOA board members squirm, the kind that gets forwarded to legal counsel. They didn't say she was guilty, not yet. But the subject line alone, preliminary review, fabrication of health policy in private governance setting, was enough to light the fuse. I wasn't copied, of course, but I didn't need to be. Gill sent me a screenshot from his personal email. No message, just the image. I stared at it for a full minute. Then I put my phone down and walked to the bedroom closet. The carrier was there, not the white one we'd used for appearances. The original. The powder blue wrap with worn edges and uneven threading, stitched by hands that trembled from morphine, but still moved with purpose. The one my mother made when she knew she'd never meet her granddaughter, but refused to die without giving her something to hold. I pressed it flat across the bed and sat beside it. It still smelled faintly of cedar and detergent. Micah walked in quietly, pausing in the doorway. He looked at the sling, then at me. "She can't undo this," I said. "No citation, no email, no speech will ever make what she did disappear." He nodded slowly. "So what now?" "Now I stop her from doing it to anyone else." Micah crossed the room and sat beside me. He ran his fingers along the edge of the fabric. "You're going to use the footage?" I nodded. "But not yet. I want her rattled first. When people like Darla feel cornered, they start reaching. That's when they break the rules they thought they controlled." I was right. The next day, 3 families in the community received sudden sanitation warnings. One for non-conforming stroller storage, another for outdoor diaper disposal proximity, and a third for visual biohazard presence, whatever that meant. None of it was enforceable, but the warnings were real, mailed, logged, signed by Darla. She was lashing out, trying to show the board she was still in control. That's when Gill called, not emailed, called. "I can't keep watching this," he said quietly. "I've been on this board for 6 years, and I've never seen this level of overreach. She's turning the HOA into a private police force." "You knew this was coming," I said. "I did," he admitted, "but I didn't know it would go this far. I didn't think I'd be part of it." "You still are, until you make it right." There was a pause. Then, "Meet me tomorrow, noon, not at my place, somewhere neutral." "Done." I hung up and turned to Micah. "He's ready." That night, I opened my old case logs and started outlining everything we had. Darla's timeline of citations, the new policies passed without vote, the direct retaliation against residents who'd supported us, the way she used a spit-covered sling to fabricate a health crisis, and then rewrote the rules to justify it after the fact. It wasn't just petty abuse of power anymore. It was coordinated coercion through falsified governance. And it was actionable. But more than that, it was personal. because every time I looked at that sling, I didn't just see fabric. I saw my mother's last act of strength. I saw Micah crying quietly in the corner of that NICU room when we brought Dallas home. I saw a family we'd built from nothing, only for someone like Darla to try and reduce it to a policy line item. That's when I knew. This wasn't about proving her wrong. It was about making sure no one else with a clipboard and a badge lanyard thought they could spit on a child and walk away protected by paper. Tomorrow, Gil would give me what I needed, and after that, the house of cards would start to fall. Gil chose a neutral location like he said, Redfern's old community garden. Once the center of summer potlucks and plant swaps, now mostly weeds and rusted benches. HOA funding had shifted elsewhere, to security cameras, to enforcement budgets, to Darla. He was already there when I arrived, seated on the far bench near the cracked irrigation valve. A reusable grocery bag sat beside him, zipped tight. He didn't stand when I approached, just gestured to the empty space next to him, like we were neighbors catching up. We weren't. Not anymore. I kept everything, he said. I just didn't know if I'd ever use it. What exactly did you keep? Gil opened the bag and pulled out a thick manila folder. Inside were printed board meeting logs, draft language with timestamps, and 2 documents marked "Do Not Distribute." I recognized Darla's writing immediately. Loopy, professional, always signed with her full name and title. HOA Vice President, Redfern Glade. She drafted the infant policy before the board even met, Gil said. I found it in her shared drive 3 hours after the incident. She backdated it for the meeting minutes, asked me to sign off on the vote after the fact. Why didn't you say anything? I thought, if I didn't sign, she'd just have someone else do it. But if I stayed on, maybe I could stop it from getting worse. And did you? Gil's eyes didn't flinch. No. We sat in silence for a while. Birds overhead. Distant laughter from the HOA run splash pad, where Dallas still wasn't allowed to go. She's not going to walk away from this, I said. The county health review triggered a state-level look. They're watching now. But we need a clear sequence. Timeline, author signatures, approval logs. Gil nodded and handed me a USB stick. I exported everything from the internal server, meeting recordings, raw charter edits, email chains. Even the flagged comments in the Google Docs she thought no one could see. I took it. This won't be quiet, I said. She'll come after you. She already is, Gil replied. I got a warning letter this morning. Says I'm in breach of board conduct for failing to support sanitation protocols during community events. I'm being censured next week. She's trying to purge you before you can testify. He smiled faintly. Let her try. When I got home, I backed up the USB immediately. 3 copies, stored in encrypted partitions, 2 offline. Then I opened the files and started reviewing. There it was, plain as day. Darla's draft of the textile risk clause, written 2 hours after she spit on Dallas. Email subject line, fast action, sanitation clause, expansion, infant incident. She'd sent it to herself and BCC'd the board. The timestamps aligned perfectly with the grocery store footage. She was building legal cover before any complaint was filed. Another file showed a memo titled Preemptive Narrative Framing, Sling, Jaws, Risk Object. Inside were bullet points she intended to circulate privately to key residents, explaining how non-regulation infant carriers posed a risk to community hygiene and public image. It wasn't governance, it was propaganda. She hadn't just broken the rules, she'd architected a campaign to make her assault disappear under layers of policy fog. And the moment the narrative slipped, she invented more rules to force it back into shape. Micah stood behind me as I clicked through each file. He didn't speak until I hit the last one, a 3-minute audio clip from a private board call. Darla's voice, "If we give them an inch, they'll file suit and make me the villain. But if we hold the line and push the contamination clause hard enough, no one will question it. They'll just want it to go away." Micah exhaled slowly. She really thinks she's untouchable. She did. I turned back to the files, organizing them into a presentation deck. Chronological order, source authentication, legal references aligned with county code. She thought she'd use the system to trap us, but she'd left fingerprints on every brick she laid. And now we had her blueprint. I didn't sleep that night. Not because of fear, because of precision. Every detail had to land exactly where it belonged. No overreach, no emotion, just evidence, stacked and cross-verified. By sunrise, I'd built the presentation into a bulletproof case, a linear chain of misconduct tied directly to Darla Weymouth's name, time-stamped documents, meeting recordings, policy drafts, retaliation letters, all nested in a secure local server with 3 off-site backups. I printed a master binder and burned 2 USB copies, one for the County Health Oversight Division, one for the state's HOA regulatory liaison. This wasn't a takedown. It was a legal submission. Micah made coffee. He didn't ask what I was doing. He just handed me the mug and kissed the top of my head like he always did before a court date, back when I was still in uniform, back when I thought corruption wore a badge or carried a weapon. Now I knew better. Sometimes it wore pearls and chaired monthly meetings under hydrangea banners. At noon, I emailed the full report to the county health investigator assigned to the case, tagging each section with internal codes and citing their own municipal rulebook to preempt pushback. I didn't editorialize. I let Darla's own words do the work. Then I walked into town hall. The liaison's office was smaller than I remembered. 2 desks, 1 window, stale air. The woman behind the desk wore a lavender cardigan and chewed her pen while reviewing a permit appeal. I introduced myself, laid the USB on her desk, and gave her the summary sheet. She read it once, then blinked. "You said this all stems from a baby sling?" "No," I said. "It stems from a person who thought spitting on an infant could be rewritten as community health policy." The USB stayed on her desk. Her eyes stayed on me. "This is about more than a neighborhood," she said slowly. "Yes," I replied. "It always was." Back home, I printed out the HOA's event calendar. I circled the next board meeting, 3 days away, public session, open comment. I sent Gil a message. Board confrontation will be part 1. "You in?" He replied with a single word, "Absolutely." That night, I reviewed the footage again. The original grocery store video, frame by frame, Darla's body language, the turn of her wrist, the deliberate lean toward Dallas's face, the spitting motion, the way she smiled when she did it, then the sling, my mother's stitches, soaked and smeared, Dallas looking up, unaware she'd been turned into a symbol of defiance. That's when it all locked in. This wasn't just administrative exposure, this was human, this was legacy. And I wasn't walking into that meeting to ask for an apology. I was walking in to show them what power looks like when it's no longer afraid. 2 days later, I prepped my notes in the community tech room, the same room where I'd once volunteered to fix the HOA's firewall, the same room where Darla once thanked me for being the kind of neighbor who gives back. I still had access to the system logs, the internal server timestamps, the very infrastructure she used to weaponize her version of order. Micah walked in with Dallas on his hip, dressed in the original sling. I stopped typing. "You sure?" I asked. Micah nodded. "She's not hiding." Neither were we. I packed the final folder, slid the USB into a hard case, and ran one last scan for integrity. Every file matched, every hash verified. Darla thought her strength came from structure, from bylaws and silence and fear. But she never understood what real strength was. It was watching your child sleep, knowing someone tried to harm her, and still choosing to fight within the rules instead of burn the whole place down. It was building a case so undeniable, it dismantled hers without raising your voice. It was walking into a room where no one wanted the truth, and dropping it anyway. And now, it was 3 days away. I arrived an hour before the board meeting. The community center's main hall was already half full. The usual faces clustered near the coffee table, whispering, clipboard regulars, the enforcers of lawn height and mailbox paint. But tonight, they weren't holding forms. They were watching the door, watching me. Micah came in 10 minutes later with Dallas in the sling, powder blue. The same one Darla had tried to rewrite from a symbol of care into a weaponized policy infraction. Micah didn't flinch as the room quieted. He moved through the crowd like we weren't being watched, like we weren't already halfway through war. I nodded at Gil, who stood near the side doors with a black binder in hand. His tie was slightly crooked, eyes tight with nerves, but he gave me a short nod. He hadn't backed down. That mattered. Darla arrived last. She came through the side entrance like always, trailed by 2 board members who looked like they'd been rehearsing neutrality. Her smile was polite, confident, the kind that dared you to blink first. Her heels echoed off the polished floor as she walked to the front and took her seat at the center of the long table. Her badge shimmered under the lights. Vice President, Redfern Glade, HOA. I sat in the third row. Right side, USB in my pocket, printed binder on my lap. The board called the meeting to order. Routine items first, maintenance updates, landscaping bids, community alerts. Darla handled each item like nothing was coming, like the last 2 weeks hadn't happened, like no investigation had been triggered, no citations questioned, no file submitted to the county or the state. But I knew the clock was ticking. When they opened the floor to resident concerns, I didn't move immediately. I waited for one woman to complain about her neighbor's Halloween display. Another man brought up speed bumps. Then the room quieted. That's when I stood. I walked to the podium, laid the binder flat, and met Darla's eyes. My name is Ronan Bexley. I'm a resident of this community, a father, and a former law enforcement officer with 10 years in special threat investigation. 2 weeks ago, my infant daughter was publicly assaulted by Vice President Darla Weymouth on HOA-controlled commercial property. That event was recorded on the HOA's own surveillance network. The room stilled. Darla's hands folded neatly in front of her. She said nothing. I continued. Following the incident, Ms. Weymouth submitted fabricated sanitation citations against my household, citing emergency bylaws that had not been approved by resident vote. She then authored retroactive health restrictions, specifically targeting infants, and enforced these policies during a public community event without municipal health approval. I turned a page in the binder and held up a copy of Darla's email draft. This document was created less than 3 hours after the assault. It outlines a narrative framing strategy designed to reinterpret the incident as a contamination event. It was distributed internally before the board meeting and voted on using falsified quorum records. Still, Darla didn't speak, but a few board members leaned forward now. One woman whispered something to the man beside her. Their eyes didn't move from the paper. I laid down the USB drive next. This contains the original surveillance footage, the full meeting minutes, all amended bylaws, private board memos, and a digital audit trail verifying fabrication. It has already been submitted to the County Health Oversight Division and the State HOA Regulatory Office. Gasps followed that one. Sharp. Unmistakable. Then I looked at Darla again. This is no longer about policy. This is about authority misused under the guise of protection. You spat on a child, and when people questioned it, you buried it under bureaucracy. But not everyone forgets where the truth starts. Micah stood up in the back, turned so the room could see Dallas, peaceful, content in her grandmother's sling. Gil stepped forward next, his voice clear. I second everything you just heard, he said, and I have my own statements to add for public record. Darla opened her mouth to speak, but this time she hesitated. And for the first time since it all began, she didn't look untouchable. The silence after Gil's statement wasn't quiet. It was electric. Like everyone in the room was waiting to exhale at the same time, unsure whether to believe what they had just heard or start pretending they hadn't heard it at all. Darla adjusted the mic in front of her, knuckles tight against the tabletop. Thank you, Treasurer Marchant, she said slowly. But this meeting is not the forum for accusations that haven't been formally reviewed. Our community deserves peace, not spectacle. She smiled again, polished, rehearsed. But her voice betrayed a thin crack behind the veneer. I didn't sit down. Instead, I stepped aside, giving Gil the podium. He opened his binder with careful fingers. I've served on this board for 6 years. I've signed dozens of budget reports, helped negotiate 3 vendor contracts, and attended every charter vote since I took this role. What I hadn't done, until recently, was question the process. He looked straight at Darla. Until I realized the process had become a shield, and then a weapon. Gil laid out the timeline. He spoke slowly, clearly, citing dates and meeting codes, referencing the very language Darla had buried in the amendments. He didn't editorialize. He didn't speculate. He let the documents speak. He confirmed that the sanitation clause targeting infant carriers had not only been created after the grocery store incident, it had been drafted in advance of the vote, distributed selectively, and logged with forged timestamps. He explained how Darla had bypassed the board's internal discussion forum and used her administrative login to mark the vote as passed before the majority had seen the proposal. He paused only once to sip water, then continued. When I didn't object, I became complicit. That ends tonight. For a moment, no one said anything. Then one of the board members, Marlene, the secretary, shifted in her chair. Do you have proof of the timestamp discrepancy? Gill nodded. It's in the metadata. Mr. Bexley verified it, and he's already sent it to county review. Darla leaned forward. I move to censure both Treasurer Marchant and Resident Bexley for public disruption of board proceedings and violation of procedural decorum. That was her move, panic masked as control. But Marlene didn't second it. Instead, she asked, Is the footage real? The one from the store? I reached into my folder and handed a DVD copy to the board's general counsel. Original format, synchronized with Grocery Plaza's internal network. Chain of custody verified. Darla turned toward him, whispering, but he held up a hand. I'll need time to review this. You don't need time, Gill said. You need emotion. Another board member raised his hand. I move for a special vote. Motion to suspend Vice President Weymouth pending outcome of external investigation. Marlene didn't hesitate this time. Seconded. Darla stood up so fast her chair screeched across the floor. This is a hijacking, she snapped. You are allowing this entire board to be dictated by a disgruntled father with a personal grudge and a treasurer too weak to stand by his own vote. Is that what you think this is? I asked, stepping back to the mic. A grudge? I looked around the room, at the faces that had once averted their eyes, now staring with unease, at the parents holding their babies a little tighter, at the volunteers who had stood by Darla at every fair, every inspection, every enforcement. Let me ask you something, I said, voice steady. What kind of community lets a child become a policy target just because someone powerful decides they can't admit what they did? Darla's mouth opened, then closed. No words came. Marlene raised her hand. All in favor of the motion to suspend Vice President Weymouth. Hands rose, one by one. All 5 board members. All 5. Motion passed. The gavel hit the table once. Darla didn't speak again. She left through the same side door she always entered through, quietly this time, her clipboard left behind. Micah reached for my hand. Dallas stirred against his chest. Gill stood there for a moment longer, then sat slowly, like the weight he'd been carrying had finally let go. It wasn't over, but the foundation she stood on had just cracked. The news broke before sunrise. Not from me, not from Gill, from someone in the audience who had filmed the entire meeting on their phone and posted it to the Redfern Glade neighborhood group. The title was simple. HOA VP suspended after spitting on infant. Watch the full confrontation. By noon, it had been reposted to 2 parenting forums, a local legal subreddit, and a regional watchdog page for HOA abuse. The comments poured in faster than the board could manage. She spit on a baby, a baby. Weaponizing policy like this should be a crime. Can someone link the full bylaw language? This sounds insane. Darla tried to get the video taken down, claimed it violated board privacy, misrepresented her actions, and was part of an ongoing smear campaign by a disgruntled resident. But it was too late. The footage was already mirrored across 6 accounts. The damage had landed. By mid-morning, I received an email from the county health investigator. Formal inquiry initiated. Thank you for your documentation and patience. I didn't respond right away. I just closed the laptop and turned to Micah, who sat with Dallas on the living room floor. She was reaching for the rattle again, same grip as always, like it was the most important thing in the world. She's not going to remember this, I said softly. Any of it. Micah looked up. Good. That means we did our job. Still, I knew this wasn't the end, because people like Darla didn't vanish overnight. They pivoted, retreated, waited for the outrage to settle, and tried again in different clothes, different language, softer tones. But this time, she'd underestimated the cracks she left behind. That evening, the board held an emergency session. No Darla, no pretense of damage control. Just Marlene, Gill, and the others reviewing every policy she'd touched in the past 12 months. They suspended enforcement of all recent sanitation citations pending third-party legal review. They opened public comment forums. They even invited residents to participate in a bylaw revision task force. A week ago, none of this would have happened. Now it felt like the dam had broken. Neighbors who hadn't looked at us in weeks started nodding when we passed. A few even offered quiet apologies, not for what they'd done, but for what they hadn't said. That's what silence costs. And that's what Darla had counted on. Gil and I met again at the community garden. It looked less abandoned now. Someone had trimmed the vines from the back fence. A new watering schedule had been posted near the gate. He handed me a hard copy of the board's internal audit. It listed over 30 violations, from improperly recorded votes to excessive citation generation, all under Darla's tenure. They're going to formally request oversight from the county, Gil said. Voluntarily. I don't think anyone wants to be caught looking complicit. I flipped through the pages. She built an empire out of fear. No one questioned it because no one wanted to be next. Gil nodded. Until you made them watch. We sat in silence after that. Not the tense kind. The kind that feels like a long exhale after too many days holding your breath. At home, Micah had already packed a small box for storage. Printouts of the citations, screenshots of emails, a backup USB. Keep it, I said, just in case. He placed it in the back closet behind old winter coats. That night, we took Dallas for a walk. No stairs, no whispers, no HOA patrol blocking the sidewalk. Just the rhythm of stroller wheels on pavement and the faint rustle of wind through the maples. When we passed the park, I saw something I hadn't expected. Someone had tied a strip of blue fabric to the gate post. Not a sign, not a protest, just a gesture. Micah noticed it too. He didn't say anything. He just reached down, adjusted the carrier strap on his shoulder, and kept walking. The official ruling came 2 weeks later. The County Health Oversight Division completed their investigation, and the findings were damning. Darla Weymouth was found to have fabricated public health enforcement documents, abused her authority to target specific residents, and attempted to manipulate HOA governance through illegal policy amendments. The board received a formal reprimand from the state. But more importantly, Darla was personally referred for civil penalties and disqualified from holding any HOA position in the county for 5 years. The HOA's insurance carrier issued a notice of increased premiums due to documented liability risks stemming from leadership conduct. That hit harder than anything. Money always gets their attention. Marlene called me the morning the letter was posted. She thanked me for holding the line and invited me to consult on the revised bylaws. I declined. I hadn't done this to join the system. I did it to fix what broke. Redfern Glade changed after that. Slowly, authentically. The signage around the park came down. No more obscure policy printouts laminated and zip-tied to fences. The HOA removed the sanitation subcommittee entirely. Enforcement officers, once decked out in vests and clipboards, were reassigned to basic maintenance checks. And the board began including residents in quarterly town halls. Real input, not just staged, listening sessions. Micah started smiling again. Not the kind of smile he forced to calm Dallas or get through a tense walk past someone's lawn, but the real kind. The kind I hadn't seen since the adoption hearing cleared last year. We walked past the community garden on a warm Sunday. More blue fabric strips now fluttered from the back gate, tied quietly by people we'd never even spoken to. It wasn't protest. It wasn't noise. It was memory made visible. Dallas reached for them from Micah's arms, her fingers grazing one just enough to catch the edge before the breeze pulled it back. She giggled. I didn't record it. I didn't need to. That moment was stitched into something deeper. Later that week, Gil visited with a small envelope. Inside was a single strip of paper, the final board vote log that removed Darla's policies from the HOA charter. All amendments nullified, all fabricated citations voided. He'd saved one copy, and now he was giving it to us. For the sling, he said. We didn't frame it. We folded it into the carrier's inside pocket, the same one my mother had sewn with her initials, long before she ever knew what fight that fabric would witness. I don't look at the footage anymore, not because I've forgotten, because I don't need the proof to remember what it cost. You think you know what strength is. You think it's about pushing back harder, yelling louder, moving faster. But sometimes, strength is staying steady, letting truth walk on its own feet, and knowing that even when no one believes you at first, what's real doesn't flinch under pressure. What happened at Redfern Glade didn't just change the HOA, it changed the way this community looks at power. It reminded them what happens when silence is weaponized, and what it takes to tear that silence down, thread by thread. If you've ever been on the wrong side of an HOA, if someone tried to rewrite your life behind a policy, if they hid cruelty behind words like compliance or safety, just remember, you don't have to scream to be heard. You just have to be right and relentless enough to prove it. Subscribe and trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?